Hi folks, and welcome back to the channel. Please subscribe if you haven't. My name is Douglas Kruger. I'm the author of 13 published non-fiction books, one published novel, and a new one about to come out. As you can see from the titles of the videos, the next several videos are going to be about the world of writing and getting published. And I'd like to share some of the technical side of things that writers worry about, never hear about, find out by surprise. And I'm hoping I can help you out with some of those. Quick shout out to the Jersey Writers Circle. These videos are put together in particular for this group, but I thought I'd share them with the world too. So, first one, where do you get your ideas? Every author has a different starting point, a different genesis for the ideas that underpin their novels. The best I can share with you today is my own experience of this. And what tends to happen for me is I don't start by thinking of a plot line or a structure or a character. What happens in my mind is I have a flash of a scene and I think to myself, that's so cool, someone should write that. And realistically, what I then do is I work backwards from that flashpoint and work out how I can populate a story around that with interesting and compelling characters and twists and so forth. But for me personally, it always starts with that one flashpoint scene and I think, wow, what a cool story. Now how do I turn that into something? Now folks, some serious spoiler alerts here. If you have read or are planning to read any of my novels, I'm going to give away a great deal here. The first one that came out last year was titled The Man Who Never Was. And the idea that I had was, imagine if a human being sacrificed themselves for their child, but with a twist. There have been people all through history who have been willing to lay down their lives out of love for their children. But what if you chose never to exist in the first place? And I had this sort of flash of a scene in my mind of a person in heaven arguing to undo their entire life, their own being, their own story, in order to spare the child who will be. And I thought, that is such a cool concept. Someone should do that. And of course, after a day or two, you sit and you think to yourself, well, if someone's going to do it, that someone is going to have to be me. And I thought, all right, how? How do you do something so strange? And I thought, all right, what you've got to do then is you have to have your main character, the father, die at the beginning of the book. So, a bit of a bleak storyline. He's like Dostoevsky novel around here, lighten up. So in my novel then, I worked out by going backwards, my main character has to die at the beginning. Then he has to have 3 opportunities to look back from heaven to earth on the life, the unfolding life of his family. And I thought, I'm onto something there. All right. So I came up with this idea in which the dad has a very strong bond with his son, but he's taken while the son is young. And once he reaches heaven, he has these conversations with an angel. The stuff is very, what's his name, Paulo Coelho, sort of the alchemist-y kind of feel to it. He looks from heaven to earth a few years after his death, and he starts to see things going wrong in the life of his son. And it concerns him, and he becomes deeply troubled by this. So he looks a few years later, and now it's going exceedingly badly. And he decides that for his final viewing, he will witness the death of his own son. Heavy stuff here. And after that, in heaven time, which I've separated from earth time, gets quite abstract. In heaven time, he spends a year effectively mute. He can't process what he's seen. And he makes various arguments to the authorities that this cannot be allowed to happen. But they argue back, free will. That's the thing that validates love, that validates life. If we don't have free will, then all is meaningless. Humans become robots. So, using the rubric of free will, our protagonist then says, can I use my free will to petition to undo my own life? And that's the entire story. So if you've read the story, it ends very, very dramatically with a severe bang on the last page. That severe bang on the last page and several blank pages, that was the idea. That was the flash of inspiration for the whole novel. Then I had to work backwards and populate it with story. And then, of course, you have to answer simple element questions like, we know, theoretically, the kid's life goes wrong. Okay, so what goes wrong? How do you populate that over 3 different viewings? And that becomes the sort of thing that you worry about as a storyteller. And the more specific you can be, the more powerful it becomes. I recently read a John Steinbeck novel. I quite like Steinbeck. I read The Winter of Our Discontent. And the story itself is incredibly simple. But if you look at it with author eyes, you can see the numerous areas where he has had to have a character have some kind of thing happen to him. And in order to do that, he's had to become very specific with strangely specific things that happen in the little town of his imagination. So that's the sort of thing that you end up worrying about, and in a fun way as an author. You go, I need this to happen. This is the effect for the character. All right, so what do I set up? Who does that to him? How does that occur? And the more specific you can be, the more the reader becomes totally engulfed in the world of the story. And I received some wonderful feedback on that from some of my readers, saying, I was so engulfed in this, wish the book was longer. Well, book number 2 is a lot longer. Book number 2 is not one of those sort of euphemistic, fairy tale-y, make a deep point stories. It's much closer to, as I say, something like a Dean Koontz thriller. It has a bit of an X factor, but it's not quite horror. It has a bit of an X factor, but it's not quite sci-fi. It's more realistic than that. So, the idea that I had was based on, once again, a flash of a scene. And the scene that I had in my mind was, imagine someone had developed a machine that can read good and evil. And imagine if it printed out a person's personality as a wavering line on a chart. You basically graph a person's personality, their propensity for evil. Now, what if you have like a rising antichrist, a person who's trying to take over the world and become a great tyrant on a global scale? They have to take this test, and they also have to fool the test. So, the picture that I had in my mind, and I don't know how to explain how this flashes into my head, but this is what I saw, was imagine if the line had a sudden blip, and then it just kept going. And no one had ever seen a blip like that before. So the assumption was something's gone wrong with the power supply, that it's just a glitch, nothing serious. One low-level techie then prints this out and discovers it's not just a glitch. The darn line goes down, and it goes down several pages out of the screen, turns and comes back up. And hidden in that tiny glitch is all the evil that this man has riding behind him as he comes to power. And I thought, what an awesome idea. What the heck do I do with it? And once again, this became one of the final scenes in the book. So I worked backwards and I thought, all right, we have a machine that has the ability to genetically measure the propensity for evil. Cool concept. But it fails. It doesn't catch the guy. What if we have a protagonist who can do the same thing, and she's better at it than the machine? And then I went, now I have a story to tell. Because it's not just the story of a villain now. I have the story of someone to bounce the villain against, a hero, a protagonist. And I decided to come up with this idea of a young woman growing up in poverty in New Mexico and Texas. And she has the ability to sense evil in others. And she's never wrong. As a result of that, very naturally, she decides to become a journalist because she can sense corruption in others, and she uses it as part of her career path. Now, what I do is I grow the storylines of our rising tyrant and the person who invents the character scan machine and the young woman who will encounter the tyrant at a later point. And I bounce between these through three characters. So I've got a slightly unethical scientist who comes up with this algorithm and basically wants to use it to get rich. He's not interested in anything that will help humanity, but he has a character arc over the course of the story. Then I've got the rising tyrant who is not quite human. So his storyline is incredibly dark and he is maneuvering his way to global power. Then I have my young protagonist growing up in trailer parks, but perfectly able to sense the intentions, the proclivities of every human being that she encounters. And somewhere down the line, she's going to bump into him. And all hell is going to break loose because she can sense the depth of the evil in him. So in both cases, I had this weird flash of an idea, and I went, that's kind of cool. How do I work back and do something with that? Now, by contrast, the next novel, novel number 3, which is still in the editing sort of stages, is called, and forgive me, I think this is my coolest title, House of the Judas Goat. A Judas goat, in the world of farming, is a goat that betrays the sheep. It leads the sheep up the ramp to the slaughterhouse, knowing full well what it's doing. and at the last second it veers off on a different path, and the sheep go off to the slaughter. So, House of the Judas Goat is about a group of children who are invited to take part in an international student exchange program. And I follow one character from my home country of South Africa who grows up in sort of middle-class poverty. She's not destitute, but she's not a particularly experienced, well-traveled, very sophisticated person. She comes from a world of fairly simple technology, a simple background. And she goes into this house in California. What they do is they have an orientation week for all of the kids. And this orientation week takes place in this lavish mansion up on a hill in California. But suddenly their passports go missing. And then they discover there's not quite as much adult supervision as you really should have in a scenario like this. And then, day by day, kids start to go missing. And they start to realize that they can't get out of this mansion. So they're stuck in this mansion with children just mysteriously disappearing one by one. No one knows why, no one knows how, but they now understand that this is a trap. They are in serious trouble. But there is also a Judas goat. In other words, there's a traitor in their midst. One of the children has been hired to lead the sheep along. Now, the game I get to play as the author there is I set up various kids with the reader knowing that someone here is a traitor. But I do little red herrings and hints at who it might be, and hopefully I confuse and fool the reader right up to the last minute, the reveal of which of these children is a complete psychopath. So the idea for that one was the other way around. It was, what if you sent a bunch of kids on an exchange student program and the whole thing turned out to be a trap? Now that one was different from the others in that it was the genesis of the idea that I then worked forward instead of having to reverse engineer and figure it out from there. Perhaps I can give you one more. Number 4 is titled The Caravan in the Swamp. And I won't give you too much on this one because it's still distant. It's complete. The novel is 135,000 words in length. But it'll be a couple of years before this one sees the light of day, simply because of the publishing schedules. The idea here is the world comes out of lockdowns. A young Englishman, Brit, comes up with an idea for a show. And the show is basically about having extraordinary experiences all around the world. He gets to one particular country, happens to be Namibia, and he goes out into the sand dunes and discovers something that he shouldn't. And it follows him for the rest of the season. Show by show, things start falling apart. And it's as a result of this, essentially a haunting. This one is the closest to a ghost story that I have. And the idea there is, because the previous novel, The House of the Judas Goat, was all set in one location, this mansion, I wanted the next one to have a sprawling blockbuster feel. So what I then did was I consciously chose an idea that would allow a character to travel all around the world. And I go to fascinating destinations in different places, and I haunt the crap out of my main character. So in terms of where do I get my ideas, that's sort of a bit of an insight into how my dark and twisted mind works. Mostly, it's a scene, and I go, that's so cool, imagine if. The Caravan in the Swamp, in fact, worked that way as well. I imagined the final part of the book in which our character is in a luxury caravan in the middle of a Louisiana swamp. The idea is he's supposed to spend the night in this wonderful 5-star luxury with this hellscape immediately outside of him. But what he hasn't factored into this is that things are going missing and corrupting and rusting and disappearing all around him. So I had that picture of this luxury caravan in the swamp. It's an idea that I get from my dad as well. He likes this idea of luxury places with sort of storms outside, and that's just stuck in my imagination. And I thought, imagine having that, but the whole thing is falling apart. It's degrading as a haunting progresses. And I then worked backwards and I thought, all right, how do I start a story like that? What leads up to it? So every author has a different way of tackling these things. I like the idea of going one book small and intimate, one book large and blockbuster. For me, the small and intimate one first was The Man Who Never Was. Then Character Scan, which comes out in 3 weeks, is a massive blockbuster. It's in Scotland, it's in Texas, it's set all over the world. Then the next one was small again. It became this mansion on the hillside and a focused small place in House of the Judas Goat. Then after that, for Caravan in the Swamp, sprawling international locations. The one after that, tentatively titled Jojo. is about a small Italian family in this restaurant in the back end of Brooklyn. And almost everything happens in this restaurant. So once again, a small, intimate venue. And that one, I don't want to tell you too much about it, but once again, it was sparked by one picture, a scene. And it was a father screaming a warning at a child and then sort of waking up from a trance as though he himself has no idea what's happened, and that exact warning comes to pass. Now, I've decided to do 7 such warnings because, I don't know, goosebumps. And that's the idea behind that one. But once again, it's a scene that I picture that then becomes this entire world. Folks, I hope that helps. Jersey Writers Group, I hope that that provides some useful insight. And over the next few videos, I'm going to try to share the practical side of being a writer. If there are specific questions that you have, won't you please put them into the comments section? I will speak about things like cover design, paying for lyrics, all of the practical things that people don't generally get to hear about. Love to hear your questions. Drop them below. That's where I get my ideas. Where do you get yours?